How did the Nazi war machine seem so unstoppable in the early years of World War II? From the lightning-fast invasion of Poland to the stunning collapse of France, the Wehrmacht carved a path of destruction across Europe, creating a myth of invincibility. But was this image real? Today, we're diving deep into the early campaigns of Nazi Germany to uncover the truth behind the Blitzkrieg, separating the brutal reality from the propaganda. Let's start in September 1939. The world watched in horror as German forces stormed into Poland. This wasn't just another invasion, it was the debut of a terrifying new form of warfare. Combining the classic Prussian strategy of decisive maneuver with brand new technology, the Panzer divisions, the Germans aimed for a swift, crushing victory. Tanks, dive bombers, and motorized infantry worked in concert, punching through Polish lines and creating chaos in their rear. The Stuka dive bombers, with their Jericho trumpets, became symbols of terror, striking fear into soldiers and civilians alike. But here's a crucial point often overlooked. The speed of the Polish campaign wasn't just due to German strength. Poland was in a terrible strategic position, sandwiched between Germany and the Soviet Union, who had secretly agreed to partition the country. Polish forces were outmatched technologically and fighting a two-front war they could never win. So, while the German war machine proved its effectiveness, its first major victory was against an opponent already at a massive disadvantage. It was a brutal success, but it also created an overinflated sense of German military genius. After the fall of Poland, a strange quiet descended upon Western Europe. This period, known as the Phony War, saw Britain and France officially at war with Germany, but with very little actual fighting on the main front. The Germans, however, were not idle. They were planning their next move. In April 1940, that calm was shattered. Germany launched Operation Westerobung, the simultaneous invasion of Denmark and Norway. Why these two countries? It was all about resources and strategic positioning. Denmark fell in a matter of hours, offering little resistance. Norway was a much tougher prize. The Germans needed its long coastline to base their navy and air force for the coming Battle of the Atlantic, and, crucially, to secure the transport route for Swedish iron ore, which was vital for their war industry. The invasion of Norway was a daring and risky operation. And like Poland, this wasn't a land-based blitzkrieg. It was a combined arms amphibious and airborne assault, one of the first of its kind. German warships sailed right into major Norwegian ports, deploying troops under the noses of coastal defenses, while paratroopers seized key airfields. It was a stunning success, catching the Allies completely off guard. The German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, played a huge role but also paid a heavy price, losing a significant portion of its surface fleet. This victory secured Germany's northern flank and its access to critical resources, but it came at a cost that would impact later operations. While the land armies were making headlines, another war was being fought in the shadows of the Atlantic. The Kriegsmarine, though small compared to Britain's Royal Navy, was punching far above its weight. German surface raiders, like the famous pocket battleships Graf Spee and Admiral Scheer, prowled the shipping lanes, causing havoc for Allied merchant convoys. But the real menace came from beneath the waves. The U-boats, led by Admiral Karl Dönitz, were beginning to perfect their deadly wolfpack tactics. Instead of hunting alone, multiple submarines would converge on a convoy, coordinating their attacks to overwhelm its escorts. In these early years, dubbed the first happy time by U-boat crews, they sank millions of tons of shipping, threatening to starve Britain into submission. The Battle of the Atlantic was a grim, desperate struggle, and in 1940 and 1941, it looked like a battle the Allies might lose. Then came May 10, 1940. The Phony War ended with a bang. German forces launched Volgelb, the case-yellow invasion of France and the neutral Low Countries Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. The Allied plan was to meet the main German thrust in central Belgium, just as they had in World War I. They believed the dense, hilly Ardennes forest on the Belgian-French border was impassable for a large armored force. They were catastrophically wrong. This was the masterstroke of the German plan, known as the Manstein Plan. While one German army group engaged the Allies in Belgium as a diversion, the main armored punch, led by generals like Guderian and Rommel, drove straight through the Ardennes. They burst out into open country, completely bypassing the vaunted Maginot Line and severing the Allied forces in two. What followed was one of the most dramatic encirclements in military history. The British Expeditionary Force and large parts of the French army were trapped, their backs to the sea at the port of Dunkirk. The story of the Dunkirk evacuation, the miracle of the little ships, is legendary. But it was a miracle born from a massive defeat. Over 300,000 Allied soldiers were rescued, but they left behind all their heavy equipment, tanks, artillery, and vehicles. With the British off the continent, the fate of France was sealed. The remaining French armies, demoralized and disorganized, couldn't stop the German juggernaut. On June 14th, German troops marched into an undefended Paris. Just a few weeks after the invasion began, France, considered to have one of the most powerful armies in the world, surrendered. The speed and totality of the victory were shocking. The myth of the invincible Wehrmacht was now at its absolute peak. So, how did they do it? The term everyone uses is blitzkrieg, or lightning war. But it's important to understand that blitzkrieg wasn't an official doctrine. It was a term coined by journalists to describe what they saw: rapid, decisive warfare using concentrated armored and mechanized forces, supported by air power, to break through enemy lines and cause psychological collapse. It was about speed, surprise, and shock. And in Poland and France, it worked brilliantly. However, behind this image of unstoppable might, the German war machine was already showing cracks. Logistics were a constant nightmare. The fast-moving panzer divisions often outran their own supply lines, running low on fuel and ammunition. The German army was also not as mechanized as the propaganda suggested. While the panzer divisions got the glory, much of the army still relied on horses and foot marches, just like in World War I. Germany's economy was not fully prepared for a long, drawn-out conflict. They were banking on short, sharp wars to seize the resources they needed to fight the next one. This reliance on quick victories would become their undoing. The blitzkrieg tactics that worked so well in the relatively confined spaces of Western Europe proved far less effective in the vast, open expanses of the Soviet Union during Operation Barbarossa in 1941. There, supply lines stretched to the breaking point, and the sheer size of the country and the Red Army swallowed the German forces whole. The failure to capture Moscow before winter set in marked the beginning of the end. The War of Lightning campaigns was over, a brutal war of attrition had begun. So, when we look back at the early German victories, we see a potent combination of innovative tactics, new technology, daring leadership, and a healthy dose of luck and enemy mistakes. They created an aura of invincibility that terrified their opponents and fueled their own propaganda. But this aura masked fundamental weaknesses in logistics, economy, and long-term strategy. The Nazi war machine was a formidable weapon, but it was designed for a sprint, not a marathon. As the war dragged on and the Allies, particularly the Soviet Union and the United States, brought their immense industrial and demographic power to bear, the myth of the unstoppable Wehrmacht was shattered, leading ultimately to its total defeat in 1945. What do you think was the most critical factor in Germany's early success? Was it the panzers, the Stukas, or the strategic blunders of the Allies? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and if you found this deep dive interesting, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more historical analysis. We'll see you in the next one.